Hello everyone, I'm Jim Lewis and welcome to this executive briefing on Alan Mulally's management system, which he used to save Ford Motor Company from bankruptcy and also prior to that Boeing commercial airplanes where he was CEO. We have a truly international group attending this program. I know I see names of some of my friends from England and some from India and all parts of the United States and South America and so on. So welcome to the program, and I'm going to tell you just a little bit about this briefing before I start. If you haven't downloaded your handouts and you have the capability to do that, the address down at the bottom of this opening slide tells you where to find them. I did send a link with the last notice about the program, so hopefully you've done that. And I am recording it, so if you get dropped or anything like that, don't worry about it. You'll be able to watch it later. Now, I also know that even though this program is aimed at executives, that many of you are not in that position, and so does that mean that this is a waste of your time? No, it isn't, because one of the things that Mulally required of people in his organizations is that they pass these principles down through the organization to all the individual groups that they managed. And so most of the principles in this program can be applied to departments, teams, your own business organization, whatever it is. And so I would encourage you to keep that in mind and think about that as a possibility. So we have an hour. For those of you that don't know, I live in Asheville, North Carolina, up in the mountains, and we have a front coming through and the wind is blowing pretty strong right now. And so you may hear some whistling in the background. Anyway, let's get into the program itself. The first thing you'll notice is that there is a bio here for Alan, and I'm going to just summarize a couple of things very quickly. I've been teaching project management courses for over 35 years. I'm an electrical engineer myself, and I got a PhD in organizational behavior way back in the dark ages and started teaching leadership skills for project managers. And I met Alan because he was the chief engineer on the development of the 777 airplane program, which is considered by pilots to be the world's greatest airplane, or at least it was until the 787 came out, and I'm not sure if it still holds that position, but it certainly did at one time. And I wrote Alan and asked him if I could talk to some of his people about project management, because since I don't do it any longer as a profession, the only way I can keep up with what's going on in the field is to talk to people in the field. And he kindly consented to talk to me. And so after that first meeting, which took place in September of 2000, he gave me permission to write a book about his management principles, which he calls his working together principles. And I'll tell you more about that as we go along. And I wrote that book. It came out 3 days after 9/11 took place in 2001. And kind of got lost in the turmoil that took place. But at that point in time, Boeing lost half their airplane orders. Their business essentially dropped in half almost overnight, and Alan was able to save that organization. And so in 2006, when Ford Motor Company was losing an incredible $16 billion that year, that's like $46 million a day, 365 days a year, he was able to apply those principles and save, he was tapped to come into Ford and see if he could do the same thing for them that he had done for Boeing. And he did, and he promised to have them profitable by 2009 without taking any government bailout money, and he did. So this is two of the most incredible business turnarounds in U.S. business history. And I'm going to tell you the thing that I think is central to Mulally's success, and it is that he is a true leader. And what I have discovered over the years, I've been around the world twice. I've taught in 36 countries around the world. My passion is leadership. My expertise is in leadership. My dissertation was on that topic, and so was my master's thesis. And I have met only a handful of individuals around the world who I consider to be true leaders. Actually, one of them, two of them are attending this presentation. One's in England and one of them is in here in the United States, and I'll welcome them. They know who they are. I've known both of them for quite some time now. True leaders are hard to find, so if you really want to make a high-performance organization, I think that's what's required. So I've actually told you most of what's in this bio, but I'll just tell you that when Mulally was tapped to be the CEO of Ford Motor Company, because I had written the book Working Together, they called me and told me that the media would be calling me and asking me questions, and sure enough, the phone started ringing, and reporters said, "He's not a car guy. Do you think he can run Ford Motor Company?" And I said, "It's not about building cars. Ford knows more about building cars than anybody in the world. It's about leadership, and you're darn right, he's exactly the right person for the job because he's not an insider. He's not going to bring a bunch of preconceived notions to the table." And I was proven right by that. Now, one caution, you can't just apply these methods by rote. I call it rat psychology when people try to practice principles without internalizing the values behind those principles. And I know of a fellow once upon a time who had absolutely no people skills, and he went off to a Dale Carnegie course, and he was just blown away by what he learned. And he went around acting like a rat psychologist, trying to use all those principles to get people to do whatever he wanted them to do. And people detect that pretty quickly because they detect insincerity. So one of the things that you have to do for Alan's principles to work effectively is you have to try to internalize them. Now, because we have people from other countries here, and I've been saying this for 35 years as I travel around the world, you can't just take what works in American culture and use it wholesale in another culture. You have to adapt it to your own culture. And so some of Alan's principles are a little bit too egalitarian for some cultures, because some cultures require a bit more authority from the leader and that sort of thing. And so if that's true for your culture, then don't worry about it. There are still some things that'll work for you, but you'll have to tweak things a bit, if you will. Now, the first thing I think we need to do is we need to understand what accounts for performance in organizations. Most of you probably know that Tom Peters wrote a book called In Search of Excellence way back in the 80s, I guess it was, and it became an instant success. And Tom went around the country trying to figure out what made companies excellent, and going around proselytizing. And some companies were successful at applying what he learned and some weren't. There are economic models for business performance, there are system models, and there are psychological or behavioral models. And the reality is that you need all three to fully explain organization performance. And so traditionally, if you look at business performance, it's assessed by profitability or financial numbers. But back in 2005, Kaplan and Norton wrote an article in the July-August issue of Harvard Business Review. They called it the Balanced Scorecard. And what they said was that we have to answer 4 questions. How do our customers see us? What do we excel at? If we want to continue to improve and create value, how do we do that? That's an innovation perspective. And how do we look to our shareholders? That's a financial perspective. And by answering these questions, or better yet, by designing an organization that's based on thinking from these 4 perspectives, we can avoid sub-optimizing and we can achieve a jointly optimized business. Now, I should explain that. Dr. Edwards Deming, who came back from Japan around 1980 and helped the United States get back on track with quality, says that if you sub-optimize, you mess things up sometimes. We've been taught to think that if we improve the accounting department, we'll make the entire business better, and it simply isn't true necessarily. It can make it worse. And one of the things that he pointed out was if you were to take the world's best engine and the world's best transmission and the world's best body and combine those to make a car, you probably won't have a very good car. The engine might be too powerful for the transmission and so on, and so suboptimizing can get you in serious trouble. And I show that with what I call Lewis's Law. I developed this principle or this law about 25 years ago now, saying that you have to actually jointly optimize 3 areas of an organization. I call them PETS: people, tools, and systems. PE for people, and T for tools, and S for systems. So you need to jointly optimize people, tools, and systems. And that's area D on this Venn diagram. You notice that if you optimize area A, you've got people and tools, but you don't have systems that work necessarily. If you optimize area C, you have people and systems, but they don't have the right tools to get the job done. And then, of course, if you optimize B, you get tools and systems, but you're neglecting your people. And this is one of the things that I see happening in a lot of organizations. So you can download a copy of this. I gave you a link for it somewhere, and you can download a copy of this model and put this up on the wall somewhere and remind yourself of some of the things you need to do. And what you're going to find is that Mulally's system actually accomplishes many of these things. So here's the link. I always forget where I put them. So here's the link to that. If you just write down tinyurl.com/Z3W Baker Alpha 2, you'll find the poster size PDF of those of that model. Now, the book I wrote was called Working Together because Alan calls his principles working together. And here's a copy of the cover for the first edition. And it's now in a paperback edition with a different cover. But Alan's principles are expected behaviors and culture for the organization. And the first principle is that people come first. This is something that many organizations say they subscribe to, but they don't really practice it. People don't come first. And so one of the principles that Alan has is that it takes not just the CEO, but it takes everyone in the organization to make it work. And for that reason, everyone is included. Now, I've color-coded these because the people issues are in blue, and it turns out that the tools are in red, conforming to my previous Venn diagram. And so the next 4 things we have here are compelling vision, a comprehensive strategy, and relentless implementation plan. Some of these kind of overlap between tools and systems, but I've just said, okay, primarily they're tools, and so I'll call it that. And it is extremely important that an organization have a compelling vision and that they use that vision to inform everything they do. Every time a decision is made, you ask yourself, how do we make that decision in such a way that it allows us to achieve that vision that we have for ourselves? And companies that say they have a vision, but then they don't pay attention to the vision are never going to get there. It's that simple. And in order to achieve the vision, you have to have a comprehensive strategy and a very good implementation plan that you pursue relentlessly. And in that plan, you have clear performance goals. Everybody in the organization needs to know what they need to do in order to achieve the overall goal, vision, mission of the organization. And if people are not clear about their performance goals, you can bet that they won't achieve them. So that's one of the basic givens. The other thing that Alan was very adamant about is that there has to be one plan. He said that when he finally became CEO at Boeing Commercial Airplanes, he discovered that there was supposedly a master plan for Boeing, but there also were department and division plans, and that they did not necessarily align with the overall corporate plan. Well, that means that people are going to be going in directions that don't take them to where you want the company to go. And so you have to have one plan. that filters down through the organization, and everything must be aligned with the overall direction of the company itself. The next principle is that you need facts and data about what's going on. You can't manage a business based on emotion, and you also can't manage a secret. Now, one of the interesting things about that is this. In one of the business reviews of the 777 airplane program, a manager got up one day and he said, well, we've got a bit of a problem here and we're working on it. And somebody said, well, how long have you known about that problem? And he said, well, we've been working on it for a couple of months. And somebody said, man, you can't manage a secret. You got to let us know when these things exist, and hopefully we'll be able to help you with it. Now, the reason people keep those kinds of issues secret is that in many organizations, there is a culture of distrust, a culture of shoot the messenger if they've got a problem, beat them up if they have a problem. And if you do reviews and performance appraisals and things like that, trying to search out the guilty, you're going to find that people are going to hide everything from you. So we have to open up the data, we have to open up the problems so that we can work on them. When Alan took over Ford Motor Company, his business plan review meeting is used to uncover these things and deal with them. And he uses what's called a stoplight report, which I'll show you in a moment, to indicate how things are going. And green means everything is great, and red means we're in big trouble. And for the first 3 weeks, all the reports showed green reports. And finally, Alan got up in front of the group and he said, folks, you know, we're losing $16 billion this year. Are you sure we don't have any problems? Well, the next week, one report had a red report. And Alan stood up and applauded and said, thank you very much. What's going on and how can we help you? And the fellow said, well, we're having this problem, and described it. And somebody in the company said, we've seen that before. I think we can help you with that. And those things go to a special attention meeting. They do not try to solve those problems in the review meeting. But the next week, there was a rainbow of progress reports. Some red, some yellow, some green, because Alan had shown by example that they weren't going to beat up people for announcing that they had a problem, that they were truly going to try to help them. And that is the spirit in which you have to operate in order to have an organization achieve excellence. So that's the last of the red items. The next one is that everybody knows the plan, the status, and the areas that need special attention. All of that comes out in the business plan review meeting that's held on a weekly basis for about 3 hours. In the case of Ford, it's shorter than that for smaller organizations. And everybody knows what that plan is, and they take any problems to special attention meetings and they try to resolve them. Now, one of the things that he is very keen on too is that, okay, if you got a problem, propose a plan and take a positive, find a way attitude towards solving it, okay? But don't go around and hide it. He also is not one of those managers that says, don't bring me your problems, bring me solutions. I used to say that to my people, but I said it with a caveat. Bring me the problem only if you have tried to solve it and you haven't been able to. And if it's gone for a week and you haven't solved it, be sure you bring it to that BPR, that business plan review meeting. The next item is one about culture and about how we deal with each other. You're expected to show respect for other individuals. That doesn't mean that you have to like them on a personal level, because there are people out there that you may have personality conflicts with and so on. But do respect who they are and what they're trying to do. Listen to understand them. This echoes one of Steve Covey's principles, which is to seek first to understand and then to be understood. And so listen to them and be willing to help each other and appreciate each other. So he wants a culture where people are collaborative instead of backbiting and backstabbing and all that sort of thing. And it takes time for those kinds of cultures to develop, but the end result is well worth the effort. Next is have emotional resilience. We really tend to get upset sometimes when we have problems because nobody likes to have problems, but yet you're only being paid to solve problems in an organization. If the problems didn't exist, you wouldn't have a job. And so you should always be in a problem-solving mentality, if nothing else, even if you don't always know how to go about solving them. So don't get all bent out of shape when you have a problem. As it says up above, propose a plan, take a positive, find the way attitude, and see if you can solve it. And you might be surprised to see that last item there. Have fun, enjoy the journey and each other. One of the things that I am very keen on is the fact that work should be fun, and when it is fun, it's no longer work. I tell people I haven't worked for a living for 35 years since I started teaching seminars because I love what I do. I enjoy it. It's fun for me, and I get paid for doing it on top of everything, which is about as good as it gets. So have fun, enjoy the journey and each other. The Gallup people are surveying workers in the United States, have been for many years now, and they find that a very small percentage of people are actually engaged in their jobs, which means that they actually come into work looking forward to work. And unfortunately, too many of them come in saying, oh my God, I'd rather be anywhere but this. And one of the basic reasons for that is that people are not in the right jobs when that's happening. So I'll say more about that at another time. In order to get through all this material, I have to abbreviate some of it a bit. So I want to come back to the compelling vision, and I thought I would give you a few samples so that you understand what we're talking about when we say compelling vision, because people tend to mistake the difference between mission and vision. Almost every business is started because somebody had a vision. They had a dream for something that they wanted to see happen. So an example might be, I work with some biotech companies, people in plant science and so on. We might have a compelling vision to be able to provide nourishing plant-based food that tastes good and yields X number of tons or bushels or something per acre of land. Another compelling vision from some of my biotech friends, be able to cure any form of cancer instantly with no significant side effects. We sure aren't there yet, but it's the target. It's what we want to see one of these days. The next one, compelling vision, is to enable people to move safely and comfortably around the surface of the earth. Now that would imply land transportation. When I was first talking with Alan at Boeing, it was to move people around in the air, of course, and actually they didn't see themselves in the airplane business specifically, but in the business of helping people connect with each other. So that was the way they looked at things. Incidentally, I should have told you at the very beginning that this is going to be a lecture-only format because I'm by myself and it's very difficult to handle questions and all that sort of thing when you're by yourself. So if you have any questions, please email those to me after the session today, and I'll be glad to get back to you and try to answer them. And you can send those to Dr. Jim Lewis at lewisinstitute.com, and I'll get them. Okay, so one of the things that Alan talks about is a value creation roadmap, and the reason for that is we used to talk about the purpose of a business is to satisfy client needs. Well, I've been a fan of some of the things Steve Jobs did for quite a long time. And if you think about it, nobody actually needs an iPod. But do they want one? Is it valued? Heck yes. And when he introduced the iPod originally, he got up on stage and he said, he held it up, he said, 1,000 songs in your pocket. And that was the vision that he had for that product. And fortunately for him, and he had done his homework, it was also the vision that a lot of people had. So what we really should say is that we have to create value for the customer And so when Alan took over Ford Motor Company and started thinking about what would be the compelling vision, he tried to go back to what the compelling vision had been when Henry Ford actually founded the company and got it running successfully. And it was to open the highways to the public. Open the highways to the public. That is to allow people to be mobile and get out and explore the world and so on. Now, once you know what the compelling vision is, it informs the business that you're in. And they decided, okay, we do this with road transportation vehicles. This was Ford's approach to the problem. And when you ask that question, you also want to know who's the customer for those things. And there's a bit of circularity here, because as you talk about who's the customer, it may change your focus on what the product is going to be or the service that you offer. And so you may know that in places like New York City, a lot of people do not own an automobile because there's no place to park the darn thing. So they don't have the same need for automobiles that people do where I live in the mountains of North Carolina, where we don't have bus transportation and so on. So if you live down here and you want to have independence of mobility and that sort of thing, then you need a road vehicle. Notice it says under who's our customer, not every human being is your customer. I don't care if you make bread. Not everybody's your customer. There are folks out there that don't eat bread. And there are folks out there that don't eat ice cream either. And I even know a few people that don't like chocolate, for goodness sakes. And of course, I personally think that's a bit strange, but so be it. Not everybody is my customer. So I need to be very clear about who that customer really is, because I can only meet or provide value. I started to say meet the needs or provide value to people if I know who they really are. So what do they value? Well, in the case of some people out there, they want that vehicle to be comfortable, have a good operating economy, good gas mileage, etc., be safe, have flexibility. For example, if you want to be able to haul things, maybe you need trunk space. If you're a one person and you don't care about that, you may not care about having a trunk or a storage space or anything like that. And of course, affordability might enter into this as well. And so once you answer these questions, you can then say, okay, what products or services do we deliver that will be valued by the customer? And this allows you to specify design features, performance specs, manufacturing cost specs, and selling price, and so on. And in most organizations, it's certainly true in Ford, it's true in Boeing, it's true in most companies, you have market segments, and so you have different products or services that meet the needs of that market segment. And so this is the general map for creating value. And within an organization, each department creates value for the users of whatever they produce, whatever their output is. And so, for example, if you talk about the accounting department, they provide value by providing the data that managers in the organization need to know where things are. So that's the idea behind how the whole thing meshes together. Now, because I'm a project management guy, have been for a long time, one of the things that I learned from Mulally was, when I first met him, he said, you know, we really don't differentiate very much between project management and general management. Now, I know that Project Management Institute would have you think that's heresy, because project management is one of those wonderful things that only the elect few should know about, perhaps. But the truth is that project management is the most rigorous system for managing work that's ever been devised. And we didn't invent any of it. It was invented by manufacturing people. So we have tools like work breakdown structures. We have critical path schedules. That was the sequencing of manufacturing work. We have earned value analysis, which comes from what's called the standard cost system. And we took those principles and techniques and we used them to manage projects. And this flow chart is my model for project management, and I put this in here to emphasize that in order to achieve excellence in an organization, you have to manage by projects. If you think about it, every executive manages strategic initiatives, and those are all projects. Now, do you need this whole complex system? No, you simplify. And so I always say keep it simple, practice that KISS principle, and drop out anything that doesn't need to be done, and just do whatever you have to get your job done. But this is the guiding recipe, flowchart, step-by-step approach, if you will. You notice that when you go down through this, when you get down to step 6, which is the green area, this is where you start doing what's called a true implementation plan. And creating that working plan is done by answering the questions on the next slide. These are steps 6A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, and they take you back to step 7 on the previous page or previous slide. So you can download this, and there is a link that I will send to you when I send you the confirmation for this program. Now, what does this whole thing about project management do for us? Well, let me tell you what the objective is. I'm going to back up a second. Look down at step 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. This is actually project control or management control, okay? The whole reason for managing is to control the outcome so that you achieve the business vision, that compelling vision, which means you also achieve the mission of the business. And incidentally, the mission and the vision is not to make money. That's the motive, not the mission. And if you achieve your mission successfully, you should make money in the process. So that's the way we like to look at this. When you think that your mission is to make money, you do stupid things sometimes that cost you your customers, and then you don't do anything right. So I say to people in my project management classes, and most executives, you should be able to recite the essence of a definition of control, which is shown on this card that these people are holding. And it says, control is exercised by comparing where you are to where you're supposed to be, then acting on what you learned to get back on track when there's a deviation from the plan. You notice the woman in the photograph on the side of the road looking at the map. That's her plan. That's the thing that tells her how to get to where she's trying to go. But you notice that you don't see any street signs anywhere near her, which means that she's probably having a very difficult time trying to figure out exactly where she is relative to that map. And so on the next page, I say this is the same thing as a feedback system, which has certain inputs, processes to turn those inputs into outputs, and feedback that tells you how the system is performing. Now, the simple example, one of these, is exactly what you see the woman having. She's got a roadmap that says how to get from point A to point B, and she's trying to figure out where she is so she can feed that back to her car and direct it to go where she wants it to. The problem with this system is it's too simple, and so we have a thing called a third order feedback system that's a great deal more complicated, and I'm not going to go into a lot of depth with it here because it takes quite a bit of time to explain all the bits and pieces, but this is the essence of managing an organization or a project. You have inputs, process, outputs. You monitor the outputs, you monitor the process, and you also have plan performance over on the left in the lower corner, and you compare the plan performance to the actual outputs, and you make adjustments either to the process itself, to the inputs, to the plan, and also to the rate at which you monitor. So for example, when things aren't going very well, you increase the rate at which you monitor, and you may have to actually change the plan to get back on track. So that's the essence of what has to happen if you're going to fully control an organization. And again, when you go back to these notes, you can sit down and think about how that works in your company, because this is your generic model for how to control your organization. Now, it says here, if you can't tell where you are, you can't have control, because control is based on comparing where you are to where you're supposed to be and taking corrective action. So if you don't know where you are, you can't have control, which means you need an information system. If it's a project information system. If it's a business, we sometimes call it a management information system, MIS, okay? But you need to have data on where things are. And again, Alan's principle is the data sets is free, not opinion. If you say to people, how's your project going? They say, it's going good. That's not data, that's an opinion. Where is it relative to the plan in measurable units, okay? Now, that's a whole lot easier for well-defined projects than it is for poorly defined projects, but in any case, even if you can't do it very accurately, you have to try to assess progress using measures of some kind. The most insidious problem we have in a lot of organizations is we don't have good plans. In fact, in many cases, we have no plan. We're just running by the seat of the pants. We're just doing something because we think we ought to do it, but there's no direction to it. And so as this slide says, if you have no plan or you have a defective plan, by definition, you cannot have control. And a lot of folks think that they're in control when they're putting out fires, because firefighting is one of those things that gives immediate feedback on progress. Boy, we put that one out. Aren't we great? Well, the question is, why'd you have the fire in the first place? Peter Drucker used to say, if you have a fire, it means that you momentarily have lost control, and you probably lost control because you didn't have a good plan to begin with. And so it's not, putting out fires is not what we should be doing. We should be trying to prevent fires in the first place. But if we do have them, of course, we got to put them out. We just want to minimize instead of rewarding people for being good firefighters. All right, so compare where you are to where you're supposed to be, take corrective action. And this slide says if you don't take corrective action when you're off course, you may be monitoring, but you're not controlling. And it's like Bubba and Leroy driving down the highway, and Leroy is driving and Bubba is monitoring progress by looking at the road map and looking at the signs on the way, and he says, uh-oh, and Leroy says, what's wrong? Well, that sign just said we're on Highway 27, we're supposed to be on I-40. And Leroy says, well, it's a good road and we're making good progress. That's not control, folks. That's monitoring. And just because you're having a good time doesn't mean you're going to get where you're supposed to go. So if you know you're off course and you don't do anything about it, then you're not really controlling. So the objective here is not just to monitor, but to take corrective action when you need to. So the tool that Mulally used, or tool/system, is the Business Plan Review Meeting, or BPR. And I really subscribe doing this in every organization. And it gets passed down through the organization so that every department, functional group, team follows the same procedure. To review the entire Ford company took 3 hours. To review Boeing took 2 hours. To review a department might take 30 minutes or an hour, but it should be done. And the purpose of the meeting is to review together where we are according to the business plan, and to decide together what areas of our plan need special attention. So if we're off track somewhere, what are we going to do about it? But we don't make that decision here in this review meeting. We send that outside to a special attention meeting. I sat through Mullally's BPR meeting at Boeing, and at the end of the meeting he said, Jim, since you're our guest today, what did you think of our meeting? And I said, well, there were 2 things I really liked about this meeting. When people announced that they had problems, there was no bloodletting. You didn't shoot anybody for having the problem. And number 2, you didn't try to solve it in this meeting, because if you had, you would have bogged the meeting down. You would have been wasting the time of probably 75% of the people here, and they would have walked out of here saying, oh my God, I hate going to those meetings. As a matter of fact, one of the best things you can do in an organization is to run meetings this way all the time so that they're structured, they're time limited, you have a good agenda, and you'll find that you get much better results that way. All this is written up in the Working Together book that I did some time ago. The basic agenda, though, is that the CEO introduces the meeting, reviews their principles, talks about where things are, gets a financial summary from the chief financial officer, and then that's followed by the business units reporting, and this is done by the business unit leaders. And this, of course, is for a large corporation. This won't apply to a small company. But the functional group part will, and so the group leaders of the functional groups report. Now, for those of you that may not be too familiar with the terminology, a functional group is like an accounting department or an engineering group or technical writing group or manufacturing department or whatever, human resources, and the functional groups tell where things are in their case. Does HR have a role in this? Of course they do, because some of the managers need to hire people, acquire new resources and so on, and when the HR folks are there, they go away knowing that this person needs help with those things, and they get together offline or outside this meeting and they take care of it. At the end of the BPR, there's a summary by the CEO, and as it says at the bottom of this thing, each leader reviews their own creating value roadmap, which I showed you earlier, the business environment in which they operate, any opportunities that they have, as well as risks, strategy, plan, and status. So those are the kinds of things that are covered in the BPR. And since this is a summary, I don't have time to go into all the details, but that's covered in the full 6-week program that I'll tell you about later on. Nevertheless, you get the idea. You've got to review progress. You've got to have these meetings in order to determine what the status is and know where you need to take corrective action. And if you do these things, you can gain true control of your organization, your projects, and so on. If you don't do these things, it doesn't work. And again, coming back to the need for data, I sat in on a project meeting at a company once that sounded like this. Hey, Charlie, how's your part going? It's going great. Okay, good. John, how about you? It's going pretty good. That's good. You know, that's not the kind of meeting that you're going to use to get control, because this is all opinion. And so, again, we need to back that up with data that says, okay, we're 80% complete on this particular thing, and we're supposed to be 75, so we're just a little bit ahead. Or we're 80% complete and we're supposed to be 90, so we're about 10% behind. And some of those numbers are a little bit subjective, but they are better than absolutely nothing. Okay? And this is one of my favorite examples. This is showing a steadily declining performance of an organization, and it's getting really, really bad, and then a miracle occurs. I'm sorry, those don't happen very often, and so if you're hoping for a miracle, you're probably going to be in trouble. In fact, there used to be a book by the title, Hope is Not a Strategy. And I always loved that, because when my engineers used to have problems and I'd say, how are things going? They'd say, well, we're working on it. Well, when you think you're going to be finished? Well, we hope we'll be finished with it pretty soon. Well, I'm sorry, hope's not a strategy, so you better find a way to actually solve that problem. So as part of the BPR, what we do is we look at planned business performance, and this is on a long-term basis, and we have forecasts for how things are going to be compared to what the plan says. And so you'll notice that we have the little diamonds, the little red diamonds that are my forecasts for each quarter or each year, depending on what these time units are on the horizontal line there. And you'll notice that in the first diamond, this one is a little bit below the top. Then the next one is getting up there close to the top. The third one is above, and then the next one is right on target. And these forecasts will be compared to actuals as we go along. And if they're satisfactory, we'll present a report that shows a green box that says, okay, here's where we are. If it's marginal, it'll be yellow, and anything that's marginal, we plan to try to recover that one. If it's unsatisfactory, it gets a red. And the way we show last week to this week is to show a box with a diagonal across it, and in the bottom example there it says, okay, this is a change from red to yellow, which means it got a little bit better, and eventually we want to see that yellow turn to green. So next week it ought to be yellow in the upper left and green in the lower right, and so it went from caution to better. And if it goes from green to yellow, it says, okay, it's already heading towards some trouble, and we need to try to head that off before it goes into the red. During that business plan review meeting, there are a few expected behaviors, and one of these comes right out of the principles. Respect people, listen to them, try to help them, appreciate them. But there's also a restriction that Alan was very, very adamant about. There are no side conversations and no mobile phones in those meetings. I have to tell you, and you're probably experiencing this in most of your organizations, mobile phones have been a blessing, but they've also created a curse for most of us, because people's attention is constantly being distracted by those things, and productivity in a lot of organizations is very unacceptable because of the distractions. So you should forbid those from your meetings. If somebody has an emergency coming up, you might make an exception where they can put it on vibrate, and as soon as it vibrates, they get out of the room because they don't talk in the room. And this whole thing about side conversations is becoming increasingly difficult in the United States. I don't know if this is true in other countries, but it's becoming very difficult here. You're not paying attention to what's going on. You're not engaged in the meeting when you're having a conversation. You're just distracting people that need to be hearing what's going on. I was at a concert last night. I got the chance to hear Andrea Bocelli, the Italian opera singer, for the first time in 30 years, and I was so annoyed that the people behind me were talking and carrying on, and I couldn't hear. It's just really rude, and Mulally is very serious about this. If you do this sort of thing and you repeatedly do it, you're out of the room. You're not going to stay there, okay? Now, what are we doing about business performance measures? You remember we talked about a balanced scorecard. And one of the things that you'll notice in this list is that we're trying to satisfy our customers, our employees, our investors, our suppliers, our community. And we're trying to do that by having profitable growth for everybody, measured in annual gross rate, and profit is measured by multiplying revenue times margins, and we try to grow the organization at an annual growth rate of 15%. Employee satisfaction is done by doing employee surveys. When Alan left Ford, the satisfaction level was up about 85%, and that was a huge, huge change from what it was when he took over, because it was probably down around 20 or 30%. Investor satisfaction is going to be good if the annual growth rate is that high, and community satisfaction will be good if you are doing things that service the community, help the community. So these are balanced scorecard kinds of assessments that you do to be sure that the business is truly performing like it should. One of the things that happens in a lot of organizations is they don't do a very good job of training, so they're not investing in the upkeep, if you will, of their employees. And you might know that Elon Musk has just been talking about the fact that artificial intelligence and robots are going to displace thousands and thousands of workers in this country in the next few years. And we're going to have people that have no way to find work because they've been displaced by robots. And one of the things that happened in Japan back in the 80s was, as they replace people with robots, they trained their displaced workers to work on robots and do other higher technology kinds of jobs for which they could afford to pay them higher salaries. Ultimately, if the rate of displacement by robots and artificial intelligence exceeds a certain level, they won't be able to keep up with it that way. So we have some things coming in our society that could be disastrous in the next 10 to 20 years. And I'm not sure anybody knows at this point how to cope with those things. So let me give you some reasons why this stuff's important. Hopefully you're not in an organization that's threatened with bankruptcy at the moment. Hopefully you are just in an organization that's performing at a good level, but not necessarily a great level. And so let me give you some sobering information. Most of you have probably heard about Six Sigma as a way of operating an organization. And that's based on a normal distribution curve that says, okay, there's a certain percentage of defects that or mistakes that we make as we operate. And if those are above the 3 sigma level, the 3 standard deviation level, it's going to cost us about 30 cents on every operating dollar just to repair, replace, warranty, whatever those mistakes. And the Six Sigma people and numerous studies have found that most organizations operate at about a 3 sigma quality level. And when I say quality, we're talking about performance, if you will. And it turns out that if you can get the mistakes down to the 6 sigma level, the loss is only about 3.6 cents on the dollar. And that's what most organizations would like to get to. But it turns out that to get all the way to 6 sigma takes a lot of effort and a lot of time. And the airlines, fortunately, have been much better than 6 sigma for some time insofar as crashes are concerned, but in terms of baggage handling, they're probably down at the 3 or 4 sigma level. I haven't seen data for a while, so I'm not sure exactly where that is. The point, though, is that we all need to be in the continuous improvement mode because, as Deming said, and shown on this slide, if you're standing still, you're dying. You just don't know it yet because your competition is not going to stand still. I'm still a big fan of thinking about sports as a metaphor for business and learning how they do what they do, because they know that they can win every game this year, but if they get real happy about that and don't do anything to improve next year, somebody else is going to improve at a greater rate than they do, and they're going to come along and beat them and unseat them. And so continuous improvement needs to be the watchword, the standard approach we take. And so Mulally's approach takes that into account, continuous improvement. Now, that's a high-level overview, an executive briefing of the system that he developed. In order to learn this roadmap in depth, takes about 6 hours. And so I've developed a 6 one-hour session program with 6 modules in it that we're going to present weekly for the next 6 weeks, beginning a couple of weeks from now. And you can learn about those modules by going to the link at the bottom of the page. And this is an active link if you have a PDF of the file. And if you don't have a PDF, just copy this down from your notes and go there, and it will tell you what's covered in each of those 6 modules. This program is one that also requires that you do assignments as you go. And I'm going to say this. It's been my experience that unless the owner, the head of the organization, the head of the department takes an active role in these things, you don't get there. It takes the entire organization working together, which is, again, one of the reasons for Alan calling it the working together principles and practices. And if you are not the CEO or head or president of the organization, you need to try to encourage that individual, those individuals, to get on board with this whole thing and make those improvements. Now, does that mean that if you can't use them yourself? Of course you can. as I said earlier, you can use all these principles in your own group and department. And so if you go to that link, you'll find a lot more information on the full master class that we're running for the next for 6 weeks, and I invite you to do that. I would like to point out to you that here are some references that you may want to check out just to see how this program works. My Working Together book is highlighted in red down here, and it is available through Amazon if any of you are interested in it. The book that is the one that you will really like is American Icon, up here, the third book from the top, by Bryce Hoffman. Bryce Hoffman was a Detroit news writer, and he actually shadowed Mulally for the entire duration of his tenure at Ford and wrote this book. It's a great book, and you'll learn a lot more about how Alan did what he did. I'm happy to say that Alan is fully supporting this program. He wants to see this program installed in as many companies as possible, because we all want to see organizations perform at a higher level, and I'm convinced that this is the answer to that objective. That's our compelling vision, is that we have more companies operating as excellent businesses where people come in and they say, I want to work there. I want a job at that place, and every day when they go to work, they look forward to doing it. That sounds utopian sometimes, because there are a lot of people that say work's not supposed to be fun, that's why it's called work. Well, I never agreed with that. I don't agree with it now. Work should be fun. My engineering work used to be delightful because I was designing radio equipment and doing what I'd done as a ham radio operator when I was a kid, and I loved every minute of it. What took the fun out of it was the culture of the organization I worked in, which was very coercive and very punitive, and I don't like working in a place like that, and I haven't looked back in the 36 years that I've been out on my own. So let me say thank you very much. I know some of you have lives outside of my program here, and so it's about 2 minutes till 3, and if you have any questions, write Dr. Jim Lewis at lewisinstitute.com, and I will be glad to answer them. You got another email address in the invitation email that you received. You can use that one as well. I have a couple different ones, and if you have any questions, I'll be glad to try to answer those for you. I want to really thank you for being here. I know that for some of you, you're at work, and some of you it's like let's see, 3, 5, 8 o'clock at night. In India, it's about 10 or so hours later, and so I have one guy that's in Indonesia, and it's 3 in the morning for him. So if he's here and I don't see his name, he's up really late. Thank you so much, folks, and take care, and hope to see you online later on.